Show me our fearless and brave, our noble and gallant ones. Where are our lecturers in natural history, and our critics in useful knowledge? There may be a few such men among us, but they are rare. It is true our fathers bled and died in the Revolutionary War, and others fought bravely under the command of Jackson, in defense of liberty. But where is the man that has distinguished himself in these modern days by acting wholly in the defense of African American rights and liberty? There was one, although he sleeps, his memory lives. I am sensible that there are many highly intelligent men of color in these United States, in the force of whose arguments, doubtless, I should discover my inferiority. But if they are blessed with wit and talent, friends and fortune, why have they not made themselves men of eminence by striving to take all the reproach that is cast upon the people of color, and in endeavoring to alleviate the woes of their brethren in bondage? Talk without effort is nothing. You are abundantly capable, gentlemen, of making yourselves men of distinction, and this gross neglect on your part causes my blood to boil within me. Here is the grand cause which hinders the rise and progress of people of color. It is their want of laudable ambition and requisite courage. Individuals have been distinguished according to their genius and talents, ever since the first formation of man, and will continue to be while the world stands. The different grades rise to honor and respectability as their merits may deserve. History informs us that we have sprung from one of the most learned nations of the whole earth, from the seat, if not the parent, of science. Yes, poor, despised Africa was once the resort of sages and legislators of other nations, was esteemed the school for learning, and the most illustrious men in Greece flocked hither for instruction. But it was our gross sins and abominations that provoked the Almighty to frown thus heavily upon us and give our glory unto others. Sin and prodigality have caused the downfall of nations, kings, and emperors, and were it not that God in wrath remembers mercy, we might indeed despair. But a promise is left us: Ethiopia shall again stretch forth her hands unto God. But it is of no use for us to boast that we sprung from this learned and enlightened nation, for this day a thick mist of moral gloom hangs over millions of our race. Our condition as a people has been low for hundreds of years, and it will continue to be so unless true piety and virtue, we strive to regain that which we have lost. White Americans, by their prudence, economy, and exertions, have sprung up and become one of the most flourished nations in the world, distinguished for knowledge of arts and sciences, for their polite literature. While our minds are vacant and starved for want of knowledge, theirs are filled to overflowing. Most of our color have been taught to stand in fear of the white man from their earliest infancy, to work as soon as they could walk, and to call master before they could scarce lisp the name of mother. Continual fear and laborious servitude have in some degree lessened in us that natural force and energy which belong to man, or else in defiance of opposition our men before this would have nobly and boldly contended for their rights. But give the man of color an equal opportunity with the white from the cradle to manhood, and from manhood to the grave, and you would discover the dignified statesman, the men of science, and the philosopher. But there is no such opportunity for the sons of Africa, and I fear that our powerful ones are fully determined that there never shall be. Forbid, ye powers on high, that it should any longer be said that our men possess no force. O you sons of Africa, when will your voices be heard in our legislative halls, in defiance of your enemies, contending for your equal rights and liberty? How can you, when you reflect from what you have fallen, refrain from crying mightily unto God to turn away from us the fierceness of his anger, and remember our transgressions against us no more forever? But a God of infinite purity will not regard the prayers of those who hold religion in one hand, and prejudice, sin, and pollution in the other. He will not regard the prayers of self-righteousness and hypocrisy. Hi, my name is Nagain Badad, and for my oral interpretation project, I chose Maria W. Stewart's first speech that we analyzed in class. It's an address delivered at the African Masonic Hall, Boston, February 27, 1833, and it was a lecture on African rights and liberty that she gave to both a mixed, in terms of gender and race, audience. So there was men and women and African American and white audience members. She was a free African American woman at this time, a woman, so dual minority, giving this speech. And she actually was known to later inspire people like Sojourner Truth and became known for these speeches, being an abolitionist, feminist, anti-slavery. And here we have her talking about the African rights and liberty that should be pursued for somebody of color and somebody of her nation. So as we know, Downtown Fred has a lot of American historical value. So I chose my setting to be actually in the cemetery, the Confederate cemetery. I thought that it would have a lot of historical value and kind of speak to some of the things she was trying to abolish and some of the racism that she was really trying to eradicate and uplift away from society. Because as we know, just like Harriet Beecher Stowe says, that idea of how you can change people's laws, but you cannot change their minds. You have to get to the emotion and the heart. I think she captures that really well. Just like we have Frederick Douglass and his narrative and Harriet Beecher Stowe. Three of them really get to the emotion, and I really enjoyed reading this speech. It really moved me the first time I read it, so I chose the speech for that reason. I chose this passage because I think it very well summarized up her points. She talks a lot about women's rights in her speeches, moral and educated aspiration. She's very religious. You can see that all over this speech. Occupational advancement is big for her, and also, of course, the abolition of slavery. At a time where abolition was already carried out and executed, but the racism was not entirely lifted away. So I just wanted to talk about how this passage relates to the rest of the points in her speech. I started from the part, "Show me our fearless and brave, our noble and gallant ones," and I ran to how African American people cannot have God in one hand, this sense of religiousness, and then also have sin and pollution and everything. She's saying you cannot progress forward and then just go backwards again. So she talks about the African race and the image of the African race and how it's looked upon as having really objects of pity and commiseration. She talks about in her first page, like, we have suffered ourselves to be considered as dastards, cowards, mean, wretches, this and that, and people despise us. She acknowledges this, but she really focuses on allowance and this idea of allowance. And so not only has these things happened, but they have allowed to happen and have been allowed to continue as well. The part that my passage comes is pretty early on in her speech, and it talks about how we have not always been like this. She talks about how, history informs us. We sprung from one of the most learned nations of the earth. She talks about how great Africa was, how great Ethiopia was, how the capability and possibility was there, and it's not being reached and tapped into right now. The very interesting thing is she does not put really blame on the blacks or the white people. I feel like it's more centered, though, on her own race. And you would think that after slavery and racism that's still continuing, she would put blame on the whites, but no, she focuses on the inferior parts of her own race and what people in her own race are not doing that they could be doing or could be doing better. So there's obviously this abolitionist movement, the move towards the ends of slavery, and the idea of really having to change people's hearts at this point. She talks about piety and virtue. She talks about religion, having to really go into this in order for it to work. The potential has always been there, it just has not been entirely fostered. She thinks that she knows really that her people have the potential, the intelligence, the opportunities, but she says, because of the religious lack of religion and the sin and pollution, she says that God has put the glory on other people, i.e. the whites. She's basically saying, why are we not defending and changing the fact that our own condition as a people has been low for hundreds of years? She says this in her speech. Talk without effort is nothing. Why is there not action? This is why we cannot progress forward and then have just prejudice, sin, pollution progress us backwards. There's no social progression for the race. And she's really saying that it just has really been, hindered by these things. The passages here really work to highlight all of these ideas from her entire speech. I think that she goes on to really talk about moral improvement later in her speech. It's a nice setup to really slowly, gradually move her audience into this idea so as to not come off as really overbearing as a dual minority, an African American and a woman. So she works her way up to the revolutionary ideas, and she focuses on how this should be a cause that gets people revved up. She ends with why is this not something that boils every person's blood of the African race? Why we should not be inactive and passive anymore. And this, lastly, I just want to talk about how this really relates to these American Romanticism ideologies, because you have Emerson with transcendentalism and really his idea of self-actualization. You see a lot of man thinking in this, just like you see a lot of man thinking in Frederick Douglass's narrative, and the idea of self-actualization, self-esteem, self-fulfillment. And it's taking it upon yourself to make that change and not just waiting for other people to do it. That's what she's saying. Being aware of your surroundings too, like Emerson, and being submerged in nature and being cognizant of what you're doing and cognizant of your own potential, really. Self-fulfillment, again, the man-thinking philosophy. There's a lot of Margaret Fuller I see in this, except with her it's genders, so dividing it between man and woman, where's the equality? But this is more of racial equality. That's what's coming out of Stewart. Equality, of course. That's what it's really about. The same enlightenment, equal opportunity, and overall just general equality that Emerson really wants, that Margaret, strives for between man and woman. It's the same type of equality, it's just racial equality. And you have these ideas of going out into the world and bringing something back and bettering yourself and using that towards science, philosophy, enlightenment. Lastly, there's a lot of science and philosophy that she talks about. She talks about the potential of her race had the white man not imposed. And I think all these things really relate to romantic ideologies and thoughts that the people that we've studied in the course have really brought up, and I think she's just further addressing these issues in a way that was really revolutionary and amazing for a woman of her time. Thank you.